Hello everybody, Fluffy GameDev here. On April 24th, the 48th edition of a Ludum Dare game jam took place. As usual, I decided to take part in the 48-hour compo. As dictates the tradition, now that the game is completed, it's time for me to do its post-mortem. That means I must reflect on what went well, what didn't go so well, and what I can do better next time. For this edition, I made the game Search for the Undergem, a short 2D exploration game in which you must search for a precious gem in the depths of the earth. To achieve that task, you have access to a droid that can dig in the ground and place some ladders to return to the surface. Anything the droid finds in the meantime, he sells for some money once he returns to the surface. At the start of the game, the number of ladders a player can carry is limited. So the player mustn't be too greedy, otherwise he'll end up being stuck underground. The droid is also too weak to go deep in the ground. That's why you have access to a store. There you can upgrade your droid's drill, his speed, the number of ladders he can carry, and much more. Thanks to those upgrades and a bit of careful planning, you should be able to find the coveted Undergem. Should you want a more detailed view of the game, I left a link to my playthrough in the description. You should also know that this game is heavily inspired by the mobile game RoboMiner, a game I used to play many years ago. It's definitely worth a try, so I left a link in the description. So now it's time to talk about what went well. The first thing I'll say is that I am glad I managed to finish the game. Game jams are challenging, especially when working solo on all aspects of a game, be it gameplay, graphics, audio, everything. So yeah, I'm happy I managed to finish a game. And not only that, I also managed to reach a reasonable level of polish and even had the time to work on some tiny quality of life details. In the end, I believe those details made a huge difference. For example, up until a few hours before the end, the UI was almost entirely made of the default grey Unity UI panels, and I felt that those panels clashed with the rest of the art of the game. So even though I was short on time, I still took half an hour to adjust the color palette and draw a better sprite. Judging from the comments for the game, I'd say this paid off. Another thing I am glad about is the 2D art. The two previous jams I had made low-poly 3D games, so pixel art wasn't a concern. And even before that, my pixel art was just terrible. So making a 2D game was certainly a risky move, and yet I believe it turned out alright even though all the art was made in under an hour. Finally, I'd say I'm glad I got to learn many things during this jam. This was actually only the second time I'd ever made a 2D game with Unity. The biggest unknown when starting the jam was about tile maps. Anything else I could guess from the 3D games I had previously made. Even though I had already used tile maps in other game engines, I had to learn how they work in Unity. This was especially crucial since I wanted my worlds to be tile-based and procedurally generated. In the end, this was another potentially risky move that turned out alright. So what didn't go so well during this game jam? The first thing is that I settled for a game idea fairly late. Usually, what tends to happen is that I brainstorm for roughly an hour first thing in the morning. By the end of that hour, I have at least a vague idea of what I want to do. But this time around, I clearly wasn't inspired by the theme. It was close to the beginning of the afternoon that I finally knew what I'd do. As a result, I spent the whole morning working on some generic features, wondering whether or not I'd drop out of a jam. My second point is partially linked to the first one. During this game jam, my time management was just awful. Roughly, I would say that 75% of the work was done on the second day. As a result, I ended up submitting my game exhausted at a time that was uncomfortably close to the deadline. I had spent pretty much all day working, taking only a few short breaks. This is especially annoying to me since I am strongly opposed to the unhealthy crunch culture that plagues the video game industry among many others. I won't go into the details here, but this could be the subject of an entirely different video. The final thing that didn't go too well has to do with the balancing of the game. If you've played Search for the Undergem, you will most likely have noticed that getting money is extremely easy. As a result, in the final section of the game, money is completely worthless, since the player already has all upgrades. This could easily have been addressed had I taken a bit more time to playtest the game. Finally, let's see what I want to do next time around. Of course, I want to address all the negative points I mentioned in the previous part, but there are also some other things I can do to make a better game next time. First of all, I want to spend more time on the sound design of my game. This is often the one part of the game that is neglected, but when handled even just a tiny bit, it makes a huge difference. In my game, I wrote a short background music loop and had several sound effects. But honestly, I still believe this isn't enough. Ideally, I should have some sound effects for everything in the game. Be it when clicking on buttons or to show when the player can't move in a given direction. Every action needs a feedback. Having all those sounds make a game feel more dynamic. It makes a game look way more polished. To achieve that goal, I'll have to plan the sound design way earlier. The second thing I want to do next time is take fewer risks. This time I took way too many. I worked with some engine features like the tile maps even though I didn't know how to use them. As a result, I wasted some time learning. I also worked on polishing some features before the whole game was feature complete. Luckily, those risks didn't cause too much harm. But next time, I'll ensure I only work with features I am comfortable with. Perhaps I'll take some time to learn some new stuff prior to the game jam, but once the jam begins, no more learning. And secondly, I'll focus more on the MVP, that is the minimum viable product. In other words, I'll focus on finishing the bare minimum the game needs before moving on to the polish. Finally, next time around I want to have a better onboarding for the game. That means I want to teach the game mechanics in a more natural way. Now don't get me wrong, I am glad I implemented some tutorial panels at the start of the game, but honestly I believe that kind of tutorial is lazy and artificial. Ideally, I would have to teach the game mechanics in a more diegetic way, such as through the level design. This too will require some planning. So there we have it, this was the post-mortem of Search for the Undergem. And if you haven't played the game yet, feel free to check it out, I left a link in the description. In any event, have a wonderful day and see you next time.